It's amazing how quickly the Preakness comes around after Kentucky Derby just 2 weeks later, and Preakness 149. The second leg of the Triple Crown coming up. Best way to play it, you know the drill. Best way to play it is to play it through NYRA Bets. Head on over to NYRABets.com if you're not a member of NYRA Bets and use the promo code MATCH200, and we'll match the $200 of your initial deposit. And there you see it, the Preakness Stakes coming up. And obviously this Preakness Stakes was dramatically changed when Muth, who was going to be favored, came out and changes the race quite a bit. And it'll be interesting to see how the money disperses. And I think a lot of that money will be dispersed onto the other Baffert entry, and that's Imagination. But let's start out with Mystic Dan, the Kentucky Derby winner. And I want to show the early part of the Derby first, because I want to show Mystic Dan and Catching Freedom. Now, Mystic Dan, it's been talked about quite a bit, got an absolutely dream trip, and Brian Hernandez deserves a lot of the credit, but also drawing inside helped him a lot. Now, as far as Catching Freedom, there's a debate of whether or not he got shuffled back early. He's in the blue, sort of behind horses, and he's definitely getting sort of stayed back a little bit there. Or if he was just trying to get position, maybe he was shuffled a little bit back. On the other hand, I'm not sure being farther back didn't help him as the pace heated up, and this race was completely dominated by horses from the back, except for Mystic Dan. And so while a lot has been made of Mystic Dan's trip, saving ground, etc., he still was close to a pace that absolutely collapsed, and by far and away, the horse who was closest to pace that finished the best in here. And Catching Freedom, there he is on the rail behind him. He got an excellent ride, as always seems to be the case from Flavien Prat after the beginning of the race. Saved ground. He was doing a little bit of running at the end of the race, but in reality, I think Mystic Dan ran a much, much better race. And while Mystic Dan isn't a horse that I want to bet in here, because with Muth scratched, he's on likelihood going to be a fairly heavy favorite. Kentucky Derby winners get over bet. And so while I won't be surprised if he wins this race, in a lot of ways I'm rooting for a Triple Crown attempt. But I do believe from a betting standpoint, he's going to be bad value. He can absolutely win this race, but his odds will be too low for me to take him on top. Now, I do want to show the Arkansas Derby. I want to show the race, even though Muth isn't running, because I think it's important to show Mystic Dan, but also to show Just Steel. Now, I want to talk about Mystic Dan first. The only reason I can come up that he didn't run his race here, because he really didn't run very well, is that he never got near the rail. He was always basically 3 wide in here. And he's probably a horse that does his best running inside. Now, Just Steel was wide as well, and I thought Just Steel ran incredibly well. And then Just Steel, I don't know who made the decision to have him so forward in the Derby, but whoever did made a mistake. Mistakes are made in this game. But Just Steel is a horse that has bounced back from bad efforts, and he's a very interesting horse because he's the horse on the pace in the Kentucky Derby that comes back in the Preakness. And I remember Wayne Lucas won the Preakness with Oxbow in a similar situation. So I think that Just Steel is a very live long shot. As far as Mystic Dan and the discussion of the inside, well, with post number 4 now, the 5 horse, he has more speed than the horse inside of him. And I think Brian Hernandez is acutely aware of that. And I expect him to be able to get to the rail early. And if he can get to the rail early, he'll probably be within his comfort zone, and that's only going to help his chances. So I do think you can probably discount a little bit his Arkansas Derby effort because of his position in the race, position he very well may not have in this year's Preakness. Let's go back to the Louisiana Derby. We'll talk about Catching Freedom briefly. Obviously got a very good trip. It was a race that collapsed. He made the move from last. But the horse I really want to talk about is Tuscan Gold. Tuscan Gold right now is ranging up 3 wide. Look at Tuscan Gold. He's under a very, very severe ride at this point from Tyler Gaffalione. And right now, the way he's riding him and the way he's backing up, and you see the eventual Peter Pan winner moving outside of him, getting ahead of him, I think it's reasonable to think he's going to finish towards the back of the pack. He looks absolutely empty, but something happens in the stretch. He starts to get momentum, and he's between horses, not the best spot to be in, really getting a bit of an education, and he re-rallies. And while he's passed by Catching Freedom, as well as the second-place finisher, Honor Marie, he, too, was the one who was closest to pace, that finished the best, and he was wide the entire way around the racetrack, and most of the others that were successful saved ground the majority of the race. So he covered a lot more ground, and ultimately I wonder if he was a little bit more forward than he wanted to be. How much pace is he going to get in the race? But how much will he benefit from Louisiana Derby? I think he'll benefit a great deal, and what I saw from Tuscan Gold in that Louisiana Derby is a horse who probably ran the best race that day, and we've seen how well Chad Brown has done in the Preakness Stakes, especially with horses that have missed the Kentucky Kentucky Derby. He has 2 wins and a second. And Tuscan Gold has the look of a horse that's going to run very well and be tough to beat. And I just wonder how much his price will be lowered from the morning line. I don't agree with the 8-1 morning line. I agreed more with the 5-1 morning line. The DRF morning line maker made it. And I think we'll still get probably 4-1 or 7-2. And I think that's very fair value. Let's talk about Imagination, who probably was going to be a bit forgotten about with Muth in the race, but now he's going to get all that Baffert attention. And listen, I didn't like National Treasure last year, and he proved me wrong. Now, National Treasure was a better horse than Imagination coming into this race, but nonetheless, Bob Baffert certainly knows how to win these races, and I believe that Imagination will send aggressively, and a lot of the pace is going to depend on what Seize the Grey does, and we'll get to him next. Imagination is a good speed horse, but he shouldn't have lost his Stronghold. Now, for those people that say, well, Stronghold ran well in the Derby, I say, did he really? He ran better than his odds. He didn't really run that well. I think he got an 81 buyer in the race and finishing 5th or 6th in the Derby, maybe 6th. I don't think he ran particularly well. He just ran better than some people thought. And the more you look at Imagination and you go through the PPs of the horses that he was running against, I think there are some question marks as to how good he really is. So if you want to bet him based on the Baffert factor, go for it. I think you're going to get a severe underlay. I won't be surprised if he's 7-2 in this race, and I don't believe that is reflective of his chances. Let's get to Seize the Grey, because I think Seize the Grey is an important part of this field. Not necessarily because I think he has a significant chance to win, because I don't, but because of his potential speed. In the last race where he won the Pate Mile, he was right on top of an extremely fast California speedball, just a half length off the beginning pace there, and they were moving in this race. And knowing Wayne Lucas and how much he likes his horses to be aggressively ridden, and considering how well, in fact, he ran the best race of his life when he was aggressively ridden, I think you're going to see Torres be aggressive with him here and be engaged somewhat with Imagination. So I think he'll be forward, and he'll help ensure at least an honest pace in this race. As far as the other horses in here, I do want to talk about Uncle Heavy, because I have a special place in my heart for Uncle Heavy, and I'd love to see him do well. And make no mistake, his Withers 2 back was an excellent effort. He absolutely beat the bias that day and beat a horse that took full advantage of the bias, and he's good. He's better than that 84 buyer suggests. He's probably closer to a 90 buyer in that race. His race in the Wood Memorial with his outside post really wasn't that bad, and Resilience flattered the Wood with an excellent performance in finishing 5th in the Derby. And frankly, I wish Resilience was in this race. I probably would have picked him for better or worse. I think Uncle Heavy has a chance to outrun his odds. I just worry a little bit that he's not really good enough. So who am I picking? Well, I'm picking Tuscan Gold. I think if you can get 4-1 or even 7-2, it's a very fair price on a horse that I believe is going to run very, very well. Just Steel is a horse I have to use as well. His good races give him a chance in here. Wrong trip in the Derby. Just Steel's my second choice. We lost those picks. Not sure what happened. Mystic Dan is my third choice in this race. I think he'll run well. I just think he'll be an underlay. And Catching Freedom, I've got him 4th. Maybe I could have put Uncle Heavy 4th. But it's Tuscan Gold for me over Just Steel in the 149th Preakness Stakes. And you'll be betting it through NYRA Bets. Head on over to NYRABets.com. If you're not a member of NYRA Bets, use the promo code MATCH200, and we'll match you with $200 of your initial deposit. Enjoy the Preakness Stakes.